Hello and welcome to the Power of Meditation. I'm Kelly Blaser and I'm here with Jennifer Prugh. Hello, Jennifer.
Hello there, Kelly.
Thanks for being here again after it's been a little bit. It's been a minute. And Jennifer and I have known each other for a long time, so you can all forgive us if we get a little punchy. But I will begin by reading your bio so people have a sense of who you are. So Jennifer Prugh is the co-founder of Breathe Together Yoga in Los Gatos, California, the Joy of Yoga School of Integrative Learning, where she oversees and teaches for the 200 and 300-hour teacher trainings. She also created Joy Map, a 100-hour course in meditation and awareness practices. Jennifer is passionate about life education, making mind and body practices accessible so students are empowered to, in a meaningful way, to blank in a meaningful way. To live in a meaningful way. She brings 8 years as an associate professor of storytelling, storyboarding, and creativity, 10 years as a professional artist, and a master's degree in art and consciousness studies to her teaching and business leadership. Jennifer leads 4 international retreats a year. This year, she published River of Offerings, 12 Journeys Along the Ganges River, a book of her stories and photographs, 10 years in the making, available at Insight Editions or at your favorite local bookstore. Okay, so Jennifer Prugh, so much richness and interweaving of paths here. I want to talk about your life as an artist. I want to talk about your life as a teacher and a leader and a mom, but I think mostly I want to start by finding out, like, at the core in these moments right now, what are the Dharma teachings and also the teachers that have been most fundamental for you?
Okay, so let's see. Well, one, I'm grateful to be here and thank you so much for having me back. Um, the teachers that I look to, and particularly, well, I always look to them, but particularly during the last nearly 2 years, are one is Mingyur Rinpoche, who I feel is able to, Tibetan monk, but able to articulate the meditative process in a really accessible way. And he's funny. And I do like teachers. I think one sign of a good teacher is levity. There's a
Yeah.
way in which it's not that they make fun of life, but they're able to be very joyful in it. So Mingyur Rinpoche, and then the teacher that's probably made the most significant contribution to my life is Ram Dass, who is not necessarily a Dharma teacher. He weaves the bhakti. He's really a bhakti yogi. Um, and Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche, I appreciate his work so much because he's connected to the Bon, the indigenous Tibetan culture, and what was woven there was Buddhism and Bon. And he does a lot of work with light and creativity and the visualization behind the practice, which I appreciate. I love Lama Tsultrim Leone's work because she is fully steeped in the feminine aspect of Buddhism, and I trust her. I trust her. All of these teachers I've spent time around, and as I was looking at this question, realized how important it is for me to spend time with the teacher and feel them and watch them over a period of time so that I can, give my heart to them and give my heart to their teachings. The only one that I haven't met personally, who I do spend every Wednesday afternoon with, is Tara Brach. I think she's just amazing how the kind of space that she provides for people through her Wednesday afternoon time on Facebook. So those are the folks that I look to, and the teachings that have been really useful, particularly in the last 2 years, have been about being present, because it's so easy to get lost in scenarios. How is this going to go? Where is this going? Uh-oh. Just a general uh-oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
And being present and feeling my body And allowing the mind to rest in the heart is a phrase that I use quite a bit, that there's this innate space that we have available to us at all times. And the question is whether I'm in touch with that space or I'm lost in thought. And the lost in thought, this is a beautiful tool, but it was never meant to run the show. So then the question is, can I meet whatever is here and work with it and then return again to being present? So being present's big. And then the other one this is a recent realization I had, which I'll just share with you because we're still working with it. I just had this. I realized that we all know by now that being kind and being compassionate helps the world. It helps anyone we come in contact with, and it helps ourselves. But there was a way in which you know how sometimes you'll hear something and you won't get it? I got it at a new level around being compassionate with our own inability. So if, let's say let's say my mind is busy with the what ifs. And I'm, as a practitioner of, meditation and yoga, I would love it if I could just drop the story immediately. But sometimes I can't. So then what do I do when that happens? Well, it'd be easy as someone who's been practicing for a long time to kind of be hard on myself about it. Like, come on, Jennifer, by now you should have this, But I recently had this realization that the compassion, it's self-compassion, fear self-compassion. Be compassionate with myself around when I can't meet a moment the way I'd love to. And that's been really useful. This business of loving ourselves is deep, deep work. So I think those are my answers for you.
That's wonderful. So much in there to chew on. I do want to ask you more about Ram Dass, so hopefully I can come back to that. But first, I just want to say, you're a creative and have made beautiful art, and you write really beautifully, for the world to see, like on Instagram and wherever, but also your book is so gorgeous. And I wonder, I'm reflecting a lot on my own personal experience as well. Like when you're working with compassion toward the mind that can't stop, or the crazy making of the meaning making mind that is endlessly stirring up a million permutations of what if and does the compassion for you, is it at all related to like a respect for how the creative the mind can be? I don't know if I'm just making something up and projecting, but.
Well, it's so interesting though, because this business with the mind, it would be very easy on the path to think that, to kind of dismiss the mind altogether. But it is a fact that some of the best, everything comes from it. This heart-mind balance is fascinating. And I knew as a younger person, somebody that had gotten involved in drugs as quite a young person, that I had to learn to work with the mind so that I wouldn't end up needing to do that. But what I didn't have access to, for a variety of reasons, was this heart. I was raised in the Christian church as Episcopalian, quite devout, and obviously the love of God was communicated, but it was something that was conceptual as opposed to actually lived and felt. And then love, and I think part of this has to do with Western culture, that we have this idea that our sense of love comes from external motivation. And then as a young person, that may very well be so, that it's designed that way so that we can fall in love and feel what that's like. And that over time, as practitioners, we learn actually how to cultivate that sense of love without the external object. That takes time and practice. But that's what I'm really interested in. I'm interested in being able to steep in that space. And so then let's imagine that we learn how to do this. We're able to just fall into love on a moment's notice. That means that ideally, when anyone comes into my presence, something's going to shift. We're going to get to connect. But so that's what I'm playing with internally. When I'm doing my practice, I'm working on checking in with this. Is this space open? And then what is the relationship between the heart and the mind? Because I want to use my mind to the very best ability.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm spinning on thought, I'm not able to have the mind. There's no discernment there. So the practices that I use through the yoga and through the meditation are in order to let things settle so that I've got a view again of what is arising. And then the idea would be that I can choose. That would be the idea.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of not choice.
Yeah.
There's a lot of what just runs. But
Yeah.
the practice is designed to wait a second. I'll go with this one.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like we're tuning forks. And I think that this experience is amplified through the yoga practice or the hollow reed of bamboo, where when we're practicing regularly, we can begin to feel what really works, what's right, and what needs to be left alone.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just an idea, and that this business of being heads on sticks is real, that most of our country don't have access. We don't have access to the wisdom of our whole body, but we know what's right and what's not right when we're listening. And so one reason we practice is to learn to listen. So how does that help the creative process? Well, it helps it a lot, because ideas are coming through, and there are these aha moments. I'm going to go with this one.
Mm-hmm.
And that if I have got a big decision to make, or I'm steering a ship in a particular direction, ideally the choices that I make are based on this feeling of, yes,
Mm-hmm.
this is good. We're
Mm-hmm.
going to move in this direction.
Yeah, and which is so important, especially when you're also navigating relational space and, choices that affect the collective in a big way.
Yeah, and pressing the pause button is absolutely critical.
Mm-hmm.
There's being able to create a life or even a life in the practice where stuff comes in. Okay, instead of just this, or I'm out of here, let's just live with this for a bit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Before the choice is made. Now, sometimes choices have to be made faster, especially in business. Mm-hmm. Decisions have to be made quickly. And this is why, we really want to be able to sit with whatever's arising, and we learn how to do that more and more efficiently over time and with practice.
Yeah. Yeah. You said earlier when we were talking about business and the kind of, hanging on by the fingernails experience that you've had through the pandemic, which so many people have had with their small businesses, you said, I would prefer to keep it. And I loved the way that you said that, because it gave me the sense that there might be underneath that preference also a ground in a place that doesn't have preference. And I wonder about that, if there's a paradox in there for you.
If I were to come, so I have this big yoga studio, and it's in Los Gatos, California, and we've been open for 10 years, and it's been a place where people have grown, and it's a beautiful thing. The relationships there are beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. It came to me because somebody put up the money for it out of this work that I did with his wife who had cancer. And so it came to me as a huge gift and an enormous responsibility, one that I never thought that I was going to be up for. And 11 years later, we're still here. So I proved something to myself, which was that I could actually stick to something for a long period. That was huge. But if it were to be taken, then I've asked myself this question, who would I be if that were the case? And could I graciously allow that to occur? I know what I'm committed to. I'm committed to doing the very best job I can. But the very best job I can does not guarantee its life. It doesn't. But I do know that at the end of the day, I will look back and know I did the best I could. And that's what is the most important. The result is secondary to that. There's so much not knowing. We were able to survive, and many yoga studios didn't. Many, many, many. Because we had membership. We had people who, even if they couldn't stand Zoom classes, they were still paying a monthly membership. We lost many members, but we kept enough to keep going. There's no guarantee ever about anything. And being able to, the ground in the groundlessness. I'm not saying that exactly right, but being able to ground in groundlessness. They could all decide they're done next month. And then my work would be finished. But I'll leave knowing I did the very best I could.
Yeah.
It's not a lot to stand on, but that's okay.
Yeah, that's okay.
And I think as we're in this field of, this is part of the meditation process, this is part of life, is being able to be okay.
Right, with no guarantees.
Whatever, yeah.
Yeah, there's that classic Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche quote, like, the bad news is you're falling through the air with no parachute. The good news is there's no ground, which it feels in a sense like, and then maybe it's a good moment to pivot to just asking you more about your relationship with Ram Dass and how that's impacted you, because it feels like that's been such a big part of what he's teaching, like the capacity to let go of things as they are, and to, even though, you're a person that has a lot to lose, how do you operate like a person who has nothing to lose?
Oh, nice question. Well, when I met Ram Dass, it was in late 2014. Actually, it was this week in 2014. I went to his home because I had been researching for that book, for The River of Offerings. I had been in Hardwar in India, and I was on the ground with a lot of guys who had polio, and they had made these skateboards. And they sat on these skateboards and skeetered around, and there was a whole community of them. And it was intense to be with them. And I wrote a note. I saw on his website that he offered private retreats. There was no way I would ever get one of those. But I thought, I'll send him a message. I'm working with suffering. How do I meet suffering? And I was accepted. So I spent 5 days with him at his home, asking questions. And I had read a number of his books, but there was a lot about his life I didn't know. So I found out things, and I'm a very, I guess, skeptical person. I wouldn't, there's a lot of folks who just would turn themselves over to him. I mean, anything he said, it wasn't like that for me. But when I left there, I felt fundamentally altered, in the sense that something occurred during that time that shifted my ground of being. And over the next 7 years, I went to Maui twice a year, at least. And I saw that in his presence, probably because, well, for many, many reasons, and through the stroke that he had this serious stroke, he was capable of immense love that was quite unconditional. And anyone who was around him felt it. And it wasn't just, it was a tangible, it was as if time seemed to slow down a bit. He wrote the book called Be Here Now. His ability to be able to be present was phenomenal. And he could just hang in presence. and in a way where you just want to pause and be right there, heart opening. So that was a physical experience for me. It wasn't reading another book, and I'd read a few.
Yeah.
This was, oh my goodness, this is what's possible. I could potentially learn how to do this. This is worth a lot. And so that's how it changed me. Was I work on it every day, and mostly I'm totally unsuccessful. But I've gotten to do a lot of things in my life. I've gotten to travel, and I've written, and I've expressed myself, and I have a great family and a business. And now, as I approach 60, there's not a lot that I want in the world, except the world to find a way to live well. But I would like to be a force of love. I really would. Mm-hmm. And so that's what, that's what happened.
Yeah. I love that. As you began talking about him, you were using past tense. And as you were talking, I thought, I know he maintained like a relationship with his guru throughout his whole life, even after his guru had passed. And I was wondering, I meant to ask that of you, and then you switched into present tense. And so I feel that he's with you, and you're.
Yeah, he is, it's one of those things too, that we all have as teachers or facilitators. Maybe for some people, it's easier to be quite forthright about one's relationships, the relationships that matter the most. I tend there, on one hand, I'm a very open person, but on another hand, I'm a very private person. And I'm private in this regard because that relationship means so much to me. I mean, if you know me, you know I love Ram Dass and Neem Karoli Baba, his guru. But that relationship is ongoing in my life all the time, every day, every day.
Yeah. Well, it's also so difficult to articulate something of that depth, right?
And it sounds absurd. I mean, when once I said to him, "Do you have students?" And he said, "No, I don't have students. I have devotees." And I said, "Well, that is absurd. Absolutely absurd, because that guru relationship is nothing I've ever been interested in at all. And I would not call myself a devotee even now. I still would call myself a student. But I do know that a teacher who has got some integrity and who's dedicated themselves to their path can be transformational. And unfortunately, there's so many traps along the way. I think integrity, even in the yoga practice, when you look at the short changing that happened with the yamas and the niyamas, the ethical precepts of yoga. Ethics is everything. Ethics is the ground through which any sort of transformation could actually occur. That foundation, what happens, power can corrupt. Power can corrupt. That foundation of ethics is so essential, and it makes everything so much easier. And part of a daily life, I've found it to be the case that when I'm faced with challenges, I've got to go right back to how can I be kind in this situation? How can I be truthful in this situation? What am I trying to take from this situation? How can I offer instead of take? Go back to those fundamental ethical precepts. They always support right action. Always. And I don't know how I got off on that, but that part is really essential.
It's so fascinating. I mean, I'd love to dive into this more deeply for a moment, because I find ethics to be we were talking about devotion first, and that's how we kind of branched over. And you were discerning between studentship, basically, or being a student of Ram Dass or being a devotee. And you were very clear that you're not a devotee, but you are a student. And then his integrity is so great that you, in a sense, I think that's the core. Like that is, and it's rare, as we know, like very rare to find a yoga community or a meditative community that doesn't have some scandal in its midst, you know, because as soon as there's some power dynamic, things do get so messy for people. I experience like ethics as being a totally non-intellectual process. Like it's like it feels to me like the nervous system and circumstances govern action. And because I feel like if there's like
say that again. Would you please say that again? The nervous system and
circumstances. Oh, and part of this is for me is like I just having, and you've traveled a lot, you know, and for myself, like being in a bicultural relationship, I've just come to see that like integrity means different things in different communities. Mm-hmm. You know, there's certain communities where your integrity is dependent upon you not saying something in a particular way. In another community, your integrity is dependent on you saying it, you know, and it's completely culturally, it's confined by or constrained by cultural beliefs and understandings, shared beliefs and understandings. But I also think that like our capacity to abide by whatever our ethical guidelines are is determined by what the nervous system can tolerate. And so, you know, back to your point about being inside your body in asana practice or in meditative practice, you get to know where the nervous system goes and how easily it goes off, and, you know, pathways back to center. And so I just wonder for you, what is that process of like, how do I bring kindness? How do I look at my own conditioned tendency to want to take rather than give? Is it a mental, how does it process?
Yeah, that's a really interesting. I do think that the nervous system has a huge part to play in this. And I haven't thought about it this way before. So let's see what happens here. If I'm faced with a situation, first, if you look at a lot of ethical guidelines cross-culture, yes, there are differences, but there are some similarities. Do not kill definitely comes up as one that most cultures agree with. They may not necessarily agree with kindness before truth, and that's a Dalai Lama, you know, absolutely comes from Tibetan, kindness before truth, but not the absence of truth. Still, truth comes, but kindness comes first. That the not stealing, that's pretty universal. So I think those three are probably the not hoarding is very specific to the yoga practice, not hoarding. We don't see it like that in other systems. So I like to look at the universal part, but it is true that if I'm faced with a situation, let's say someone does something I consider to be, you know, not okay, there needs to be communication. So what I've got to do is I've got to press the pause. I've got to go in and look at what my reactions are. My first reaction is often, it goes something like this with most situations. I cannot believe this is happening, yada, yada, yada. Okay, so that built into that is resistance. It's resistance in my nervous system. And also my head is just saying, you gotta be kidding me. Mm-hmm. I have not been able to sit with it such that it is occurring and I'm able to be present with it. So that's the first step.
It's right? So much like it's like a grief reaction in a way, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and that almost all of my struggle comes from my inability to accept a thing the way it is. So that's the first work, the RAIN practice, Tara Brach's RAIN practice, which is great. Recognize the issue. Okay, accept. Then inquire. So then we go into kind of this exploration. How could I skillfully approach this situation with as little damage as possible on my end? You know, how clean can I be here? And ideally, we both come to an understanding. And then the nurturing part at the end of the RAIN process, that piece, maybe sometimes I'll feel wounded by what has occurred out there. So I've got to be sure I've taken care of my heart in regard to that. But I would say it's pause allow myself to feel what's here, allow myself to have the reactions that are not before I go to the person. That is always key for me. I do not go to the person in the middle of my process. Have all those reactions here, see them all, right? And then through that, the right action arises. And that's right action arising is part of a nervous system that's quite healthy. Because by the time I've communicated with them, or I go to communicate with them, I'm pretty clear and I can live with the decision that I've made in a way that's not activating my nervous system. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think that what's interesting to me is like, I have small children. And so like, there's very few opportunities to walk away from small children. Everything's on the fly. Right. And so
I have a large child. He's 6'3" almost now.
He's gigantic. Yeah.
And the other night, he didn't tell me what time he was coming home. And when he walked in the door, I said to him, this is the luxury of having an older child I said, right now I have nothing useful to say to you, but I'll be back with you in the morning. And then he went to his room and he went through a whole process and I went through a whole process. And then we met in the morning, we talked about everything that occurred and we resolved it. You don't get that with small kids. You hopefully do get that with adults.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes stuff has to happen in the middle, and then there's cleanup work that has to be done afterwards.
Yeah. And it's all okay. I mean, it's interesting too, like, this will relate to the final question that I want to ask you. I hope, fingers crossed. I feel like one of the things that happens inside meditation practice is we kind of break the brain. We break our brains, like the brain that was, or the thought processes, the whole constructs through which we view reality kind of break because we just see how much more space there is between the conditioned constructs than we realized, and so there's such a, I don't know, different, it feels to me like such a different way, which can then, if there's like a relational dynamics, the capacity to like question one's own position on things is so big that in my experience, at least, it can be just an incredible like serpentine to then come back to, okay, well, this is what I'm going to stand on as the truth of the moment. This is the emotional experience that I'm having, that I do feel like the needs underneath that are valid enough for me to then, lobby and advocate for myself, what have you, it's just it's such a collage of, and so sometimes I'm a little tentative about, obviously we're talking to meditators and yogis here in this summit. And so like we've already opened the door, right? But sometimes I feel like, if people haven't like stepped into the Dharma, I'm like, okay, you're probably good out there, just in conventional reality, just doing your thing, like thinking that you are this solid person, like just, achieving and being fancy and getting fancy nails, whatever. Like it's kind of neat in a way. And so in a way I wonder, and I know you've built this whole, what is it called? The mapping the inner life, the joy map, right? And this whole like library of practices that to me, it sounds like the way that you're approaching it. It's like you're bringing all of your history as an artist, as a storyteller, as a meditator, as a mom, as a yogi, to bring like really accessible ways to people. This is how you can transform your attention and map your joy into your beingness. So I guess I'm just wondering, like, are there places where you tell me about the way that you construct a library of practices in a way that sort of protects people's relationship with conventional reality and the intactness of a psyche that believes it is a thing or a self that believes it is intact, and then also gives people access, windows of opening into the freedom and spaciousness that can be.
Okay, let me see if I can let's see if we can do this. All right. Well, in yoga, back to the yoga philosophy in the Upanishads, the koshas, the five koshas, the body, and then the breath, and the breath is really connected with emotion. And then this busy mind, which can be so useful as a tool. And then the Vijnana Maya kosha is explained in a variety of different ways. Sometimes it's this larger wisdom or intuition or the archetypal, like maybe we have a symbol that rises from a dream, or situations occur that seem to have some serendipity to them. And then the self, with a capital S at the center of that, which from a Buddhist perspective would be the hollow bamboo, the no self. So the way I constructed I have a program, and that program takes place, you can do parts of it, or you can do the whole thing for a certificate. But the way I developed the program was, first we have to be able to just rest in being aware, cultivate awareness. Notice that almost all the time we are aware of whatever thought we're having. Sometimes we lose that awareness. When I lose that awareness, I'm usually really well in it. And that's when I know I need to step back and observe what's occurring. So it's just cultivating awareness, and then cultivating some compassion and loving kindness and appreciation for other people's successes, and a sense of equanimity, like a baseline. Like, no matter what's going on, I can be here. We do that in the winter time. And in the spring, we then go in and we look at the emotions that do arise in us, or the different qualities of being that arise, and we attempt to articulate that through language, sometimes haikus, to tell you the truth, or drawing, which scares people, but it's not about what it looks like, or photography. How do we express what's in here? And that over that year, we begin to realize, wow, everything that I thought I was, because we identify with this I so heavily, is really in question. And actually what we share is this space, and that we've got these proclivities, we've got what we call this personality that we work with. Sometimes that's referred to as karma. Have you heard that phrase? Your karma is your thoughts, which is really interesting. We're each given this toolbox to work with this individual circumstances. And all of that's so mysterious, but those are the tools with which we get to wield whatever it is that wants to come from and through us. Mm. And that we're likely going to be a lot more successful if we can be present to, it's a lot to be present with and to work with. But anyway, that's the year-long course. Now, what was the question?
I mean, I think you answered it really beautifully there. So my question was basically like, how do you cultivate like an arc of teaching?
Yeah, that's the trajectory, but the awareness part's really important, because there's no time along this path where, just as you're asking the question, I could hear that the hawk is back outside. The hawk was making, and okay, I have a moment where I can completely be present with you, and wow, there's the hawk again. The hawk is here, and I'm sitting on my cushion, being able to be present in the moment. It's the simplest practice, and yet, oh my goodness, we're gone just like that.
Yeah.
So, and that for people who have busy lives, most of us spend our time in the body kosha, the outer kosha. If we're lucky during the day, we've touched in on the breath and the expansiveness of the breath, and we've observed the emotions that have come, and we've been present to them, and we've felt them deeply from awareness. And then we've noticed our thoughts, that third kosha. We've noticed that these thoughts are thinking us for whatever reason. They're thinking us. We found a way to make enough room for all of that so that we can listen more deeply. Because as artists, and I think we're all artists, how that gets expressed is up to each one of us. Or, well, I don't even know that it's up to each one of us, but how can we listen in such a way that we can be truly useful? And, I called the Joy of Yoga program the Joy of Yoga program years and years ago, 2007, I think, because it was a take on the joy of cooking. But that joy has been really useful. And we talk about in the practice that joy is the fundamental ground. in regard to groundlessness, joy is the fundamental ground. It's not about being happy all the time. It's about if I've got a decision to make, how can it be as simpatico, as equanimous? Can it feel good? Can this decision feel good internally? Is there joy here? And so in that process of when we are deconstructing thought and we're not as married to our thought, there's some kind of umbilical cord. And for me, that umbilical cord is joy. I go back again and again. Is this going to produce something beautiful or not? And how can whatever it is I'm doing produce the most joy possible? So that's how I deal with the randomness of.
Yeah. I love it. You're such a non-dual tantrika right there, There's an incredible article by this scholar, Elizabeth Ratier. I'll send it to you. It's really questioning, like, is compassion more fundamental than joy, or is joy more fundamental than compassion? Like, if our essential nature is bliss and freedom, svatantriya, then how are we relating to the other if we're actually completely connected at this level of joy? And it's a spin, because oftentimes, like, our actions are directed by, how am I going to be the most compassionate toward the part of this other being who is suffering? And if in doing that, am I projecting my own unresolved suffering onto that person and then just being careful? Or do I source from the interconnectedness that is freedom and bliss instead? And I haven't decided.
That's brilliant. That's a fabulous question. If I were looking at you and you were suffering, then the hollow bamboo reed that I am over here, I would be attempting to contact the hollow bamboo reed that you are over there without bypassing the suffering. In fact, I would be including and holding that suffering in a way that ideally I can contact that great space that we both are. And that in communication with others, what so often happens is we get stopped at the surface, and we no longer recognize. We were never trained, we were never educated to recognize the oneness in each of us without discounting with the diversity.
Yeah. We haven't been trained to understand the multiplicity within ourselves either. That's the other thing that I think is fascinating, to, like, how are we with all of these different aspects of our beingness, Anyway, we obviously could just go on and on, but we have come to the end of our time, and it's been a real delight. And we have a free gift from you that people will find on the page. And Jennifer, I just want to thank you so much for all of your time and your service and your light and your playfulness.
Well, thank you. And I thank you so much for being, having these conversations with people, because they're so essential. And
good times. It's good time. Yeah. Lots of love.
Lots of love.
Be well.